So today we are going to go over what type of persuasion tactics get brought to bear in a modern day, highly competitive presidential election. This is the type of thing where two people are going for the most powerful office in the world and selling themselves to hundreds of millions of people, not even just millions, hundreds of millions of people. Now, the thing about this is an interesting little dynamic that's at play here, because they're not only having to sell themselves to the audience, but they also have to deal with a live competitor that's also trying to destroy them and break them down in the middle of all of this. There's a very interesting book that kind of goes over a little bit of the dynamics at play here. The book is called The Person You Mean to Be: How Good People Fight Bias. Now, this book, it breaks down leadership and persuasion and everything into two main categories: warmth and strength. And it determines how much you need of that based off the biases of the audience that you receive. So this doesn't play a factor in people who already know you, but are people who are maybe on the fence for you, a little standoffish, or groups of people who just aren't aware of you yet. When you're trying to lead people and get middle of the road individuals to your side, these are the things that are going to be at play. Now, it goes over different things as far as like appearance, weight, and all that stuff. But what I really want to focus on here is what it talked about when it came to race and gender biases. For instance, in that book, they go over how the balance is distributed based off of race, gender, and all these other things. For instance, in this case, you have a minority woman versus a Caucasian man. Now, in this book, it goes over how people are perceived based off of these kind of inherent biases of the listeners. For instance, a black man has to taper and tailor his communication with a lot more warmth and strength. It has to be balanced, because if you don't, you'll come off as cold or even threatening to the individuals that are listening to you. On the flip side, a black woman, there's this social expectation for them to be more aggressive, more assertive. It's acceptable. It's accepted. So when they communicate, they can infuse a lot more strength into their communication as well as the warmth. They can lean heavy into their strength and it be accepted by people. And on the flip side, you have a white man. See, there's an expectation for white men to be more aggressive, more assertive. So when they behave like that in their communication, more direct, more strength oriented, it's more acceptable for them to do that. And they have to use less warmth for their points to come across. And on the flip side, white woman, they have to actually use a lot more warmth in their communication. If they use too much strength, they come off as that whole ice queen kind of thing, and people don't really want to listen to what they're saying. And so you'll get to see a lot of this dynamic at play in this debate. I'm very interested to see what we're going to learn from here and break down the communication styles of what happens when somebody tries to take over the world. All right, let's kick it off. Most things you want out of life involve other people. Want more money? Where's the money come from? Other people. You want better relationships? Obviously, other people. Your own internal happiness and joy. You can't be surrounded by a bunch of chaos coming from other people. You have to be able to see through people's masks and be able to be creative and think laterally, solve all the problems, and be persuasive. Because if you don't, you're going to find yourself paranoid about people around you, unable to solve the problems that are facing you, feel overwhelmed, and ultimately not get the things that you want out of life. So in order to fix that, you need to become a brilliant problem solver who can see into people's souls and persuade them many different ways. That's going to allow you to take control of your environment, break through any plateaus, and reach your full potential. Click the link in the description below and get my free meditation that's going to open up your lateral thinking and problem solving abilities, and then schedule a call with my team so we can talk about how we can take you to your highest level.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
See you. Have fun.
Thank you.
Interesting. So it kicked off with, obviously there's a social norm of typically during these debates, the two candidates meet in the center, shake hands, and do their thing. Now, most people who are aware of this, they kind of know what's going on in the background of all of this. So these two participants don't really like each other legitimately. And Donald Trump actually tried to subvert the social expectation and tried to cut straight to his podium and avoid the whole handshaking thing to begin with. Now, Kamala Harris, seeing that whole thing, she made a choice in that moment. She cut to the center, realized what he was doing, and then decided to cut over and go straight at him and extended her hand and forced the handshake, essentially. Like, she knew what was going on. She decided to force the handshake anyway. And she used her verbal communication, just saying her introduction, Kamala Harris. He knows who she is. She knows who he is. Obviously, that was just a quick throwaway line she did just as a filler for the action that's being taken place. She really couldn't think of nothing else to say in that moment. And she didn't want to say nice to meet you or anything. So she just said her name, and then Donald Trump shook her hand, said, let's have a great debate. All right, now they're back into the whole thing. But it's very interesting. There were two very, very aggressive moves that were played out right then and there. Donald Trump subverting social expectations and trying to get straight to the point. Kamala Harris not wanting to be checked like that, aggressively forcing him to shake her hand. And the reason why he actually decided to shake her hand too, by the way, is something called social expectations. In that moment, what Kamala Harris did was she brought to bear the situation, all the people watching, and her showcasing a certain standard of expectation. When she came forth and reached her hand to shake it, if he had at that moment decided not to, he could have lost massive points with people. So she used the social expectations of the situation to force him into her frame in that moment, which is very powerful. And it's something that a lot of people will do, where they utilize like groups of people or the authority of the clan or whatever else to force people who are more individualistic into a frame or into complying with something.
Welcome to you both. It's wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight.
Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their number one issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Vice President Harris, you and President Trump were elected 4 years ago, and your opponent on the stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid.
All right. Very interesting opening line that she used. So what she's doing here is she's creating resonance with the people who's her target avatar, which is the American middle class. Essentially what she's saying is, I'm like you. It's a technique. They call it many different things. You can call it mirroring, developing commonalities, resonance, things like this. But essentially it's a warmth tactic to make the person feel good and open to accepting the information that you're giving them. Essentially, the way that she delivered it is in the form of something called a casual remark. So it's something that you just say. It's supposed to just kind of go under the radar of a person's conscious awareness. It's kind of like with salespeople. You ask them a question about whatever their product is. When they say something like, oh, yeah, a lot of our clients say that. What usually happens is da 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 da. So the first part, when they say a lot of our clients say that, that's the casual remark. That's the thing that's actually sending a lot of information to you sort of under the radar. While your mind is focused on the answer of them answering your question with the latter part, the first little initial casual remark slipped under the radar and then gave you, your subconscious mind, dots to connect on its own. So essentially with that technique is you're kind of sneaking in some information or frame of mind that you want to get in across with the person. Now, the way that this technique works though, you cannot go to the well too many times doing it, because if a person hears you say that multiple times, their mind catches on and then they start getting resistance to what you're doing. They start feeling like you're trying to manipulate them. Casual remarks, you need to just utilize them one time, throw them and let them go kind of thing. Now, unfortunately for Kamala, she took this technique and she overused it in multiple interviews. The point though is you can use it in one interview, one little thing, and get it off. But because she didn't treat each interview as if it was an ongoing conversation, she acted like it was fresh. When she used the I was a middle class person, this or that over and over again, it created a situation where people were like, stop saying that. I don't care about that. Da, 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 da. The individuals who were obviously opposed to what she's saying, but people caught on to the fact that she used that line line multiple times to kick off answering the question, because that type of technique, you can't not use it multiple times with the same person and expect them not to hear it and catch on to what you're doing when it comes to that. They start thinking that it's a calculated line, which it is, but that type of technique has to be used very sparingly. But this is the first time we heard it in the debate, so it does the thing that she's trying to do. Her goal here right now is to set up warmth and connectivity to the middle class, and then that's going to open the person up for the next words that she says to land on them. It's a very, very powerful technique, by the way. You definitely want to start off a lot of times with some sort of warmth. You don't have to, but it's always good to kind of grease the wheels with these sort of things.
And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
Interesting. See, so she set up, I'm middle class America like you. I come from that background. You and I are the same, to make the middle class resonate. And then after that, she created a space between her and the opponent for that. Like, I'm like you, and he doesn't have a plan for you, but I do. So she created an us versus them frame there. That's what that's called. That's a technique a lot of public speakers do, marketers, influencers, things like that, cult leaders. It's a thing where it's you and your group of people versus the enemy. Now, by doing that, it's just another type of warmth technique. It's just another camaraderie, like we're together kind of thing, resonance and all that sort of stuff. It boils back down to that point. But then it also creates the opposite effect where the other person is not in that camp. It's not warmth. There's no resonance with that person.
I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people.
All right, the next line. I believe in the ambitions, the aspirations of American people. Now, what this does is it creates a sense of hope. It creates a sense of relief. So I'm like you, he's not like us. I have a plan for you, and now there's the energy of hope. So what this is really doing is not necessarily making a person believe what she's saying logically, but what it's doing is, after saying I'm like you and I have something for you, here's some value. This is enticing the individuals towards her words at this point.
And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy. Because here's the thing.
All right. So here's the thing is a transitional statement, but the frame that she set was branding her plan. That is the thing that she embedded it in earlier when she said I was the only one who has a plan. She also threw another casual remark in there with that to set up the idea that she has a plan for the whole thing. When she also at the same time simultaneously framed Donald Trump as not having a plan. So after she created the emotional state of value in the people in the form of hope, then she branded that feeling with the words opportunity economy. So now she's branding her solution that has the emotional state of hope value associated to it. Very interesting technique. I really like that actually, because it creates this sort of emotional certainty in the thing that you said and gives them a logical place for the mind to go to justify that certainty, even though it doesn't have any actual substantial points in it yet.
We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut.
All right. So up until the point where she was talking about extending a tax cut, I want to focus on that. So what she ended up doing there was, after she created that branded value, the opportunity economy, after that, what she did, she started leveraging pain. So what pain does is pain creates a sense of urgency. It creates movement. It creates a push towards or away from something. That's what pain does. Pain is the thing that causes people to take action a lot of the times, more so than pleasure. She created an emotional value connected to a brand, and then she's now accelerating that value with pain. She's like, this is the pain, this is the pain, this is the pain. And that's pushing the value up higher and higher and higher by doing it like that.
And the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on...
We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend to... Okay, so that right there, That was her transitional statement. So she transitioned off of the pain that she accelerated with into the new concrete solutions. So now she's giving the logical certainty to the emotional certainty that she had, but the actual specifics of it. And so she had to transition between these two things. So she fused it. She went from the pain, and then she took one of the major pains that she has a solution towards and said it in a way where people understood. We know that. The way that she phrased that is still within that us unity, our group, us kind of thing. And it's an understood thing. So where people will just agree with it. We know that, da 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 da. Yeah, that's true. We do know that. You're right. Yeah, we know that this is one of the problems. So I have this solution for that. So now she's using that to transition into our solution. Very interesting. I love that. I love the way that she did that. That was very, very smooth. A lot of people have issues with transitioning off of pain into pleasure techniques and all the other sort of stuff when they're trying to convince somebody of something. So her transitional statement was very, very masterful in that moment.
Extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children.
So now what she's doing is, now that she's creating this logical certainty around it, she's now painting the picture for it. So she's turned it into a narrative story at the same time. She's painting the picture of the value so that you have this emotional hope value that got built up. You started feeling the pain and the sense of urgency and the drive to want that hope even more. And then she gave you the specifics and branded it like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to get. That's what I'm going to get. That's what I'm going to get in an accelerated way. And then she's taking you through the vision of it. You're now literally imagining this. So this is a visualization too at the same time. So she's using multiple things on top of this, which is really, really good. Let's see more.
My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a 50.
Okay, so she did another transition. So she had to transition off of the previous point of as far as the housing credit goes. So her method of transitioning off of that was to create a little bit more rapport. So she used a narrative story to relate to the audience that she's trying to speak to, the middle class American. So she kicked into that and started using references that they might have been aware of and they might have seen in their lives. So they resonate with that. So like, oh yeah, that's true. I'm like that, da da da. I've seen that. Absolutely right. And by doing that, that's again opening them up to the next thing that she's going to say. And then also too, when you bring somebody in with a narrative story, they shut off their conscious, logical, kind of critical mind and then kind of get pulled along what you're trying to say to them at that moment. It's a very powerful technique. It happens when people watch movies, for instance. You kind of sit down and get immersed into the story, kind of let go, essentially, a lot of times with a lot of people when they're trying to enjoy the actual movie. So she's leveraging that same mechanism by taking them through this narrative story and then building up a lot of goodwill and warmth before then creating another value point.
$50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan.
Okay, so that line and phrasing, my opponent on the other hand. So what she did was she started off with resonance and warmth. She created a bit of value, embedded the little ideas and the frames that she wanted. And then she accelerated that with pain and then created a narrative story and more value and brought the value to its highest level. And then she used a transitional statement to frame her opponent in a way where he is the enemy of that. He's the opposite of all of this value, all of these hopes and these dreams and these things that you actually want. And she's creating an associative emotional state. So a person will feel just averse to that. And how do you feel about somebody who's trying to rob you of value, take things from you? You feel disdain. She's creating disdain towards him and she's painting the picture for it right now.
Is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit.
Interesting. So Not only did she create that emotional frame of him being the enemy that's going to take it, she then also stacked on top of the us versus them frame that she's been doing previously, where it's like us middle class people or whatever. Now she's framed him as the friend of the billionaires, like the guys who are the enemy. Just think about this. A lot of times with people who are in the middle class or lower income brackets, they see rich people as like greedy enemies, things like that. It goes back to that whole thing where I was telling you about predispositions. So taking the predispositions of people who hate certain people or certain things, she's triggering those responses within her audience. Like she's making it to where he's part of those people that's always oppressing them and has their horrible interests in mind. And all of this, by the way, what I'm saying is not coming up logically on the surface. It's an emotional sort of reaction that a person is getting that's influencing their conscious mind. It's a very, very powerful persuasive technique. When you can really move a person emotionally, 99% of the work is done. And all you have to do at that point is just connect some logical thing to justify that emotion. And they'll just ride with it.
Opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month.
All right, so then now what she's doing is really the opposite of what she was doing for herself. So she created an emotional certainty around her thing. She propelled it up with pain, and then she had a crescendo of value that she created. And so what she ended up doing with him was she then, after doing this little swing up to her value, she bridged it off and made him the enemy of it and started branding him as the enemy of it. And then used pain to accelerate him away from the value even more, and then branded it specifically Trump sales tax. So after creating all of that emotional disdain and aversion towards him, she then gave a logical branding for it. So a person can now put their mind towards a specific thing to justify the emotional state that she created earlier. So that makes it very, very easy for a person to like shut off and not hear anything at that point. It's like your Trump sales tax. I don't want to hear nothing else. I'm not dealing with that, etc., etc., etc. Drawing conclusions basically from that branding that she created.
Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
All right, that makes a lot of sense as far as what she did with the technique. So after creating a branding of him on the specific negative emotional state that she created, she then leveraged something called an authority bias. So there's something that Charlie Munger talked about. He calls it 25 cognitive biases. There are actually a lot more than 25, but a cognitive bias is basically a shortcut process a person makes for decision making. Like if you don't have time to gather up all of the information and you need to make a decision about something, what your mind will do is it will look for certain little things to help you make that decision quickly. It's a thing that was evolved for us. We encounter different things out in the wild we don't really know, and the risk could be very, very high if we make a bad decision. So in that moment, we'll leverage something that will help us make a better decision for ourselves. So an authority bias, for instance, that's like, hey, this person spent that time, they're an expert with that, so I'll just trust what they say. It's like if your elder says don't eat that plant, it's poisonous. You're not going to eat the plant to test it out for yourself, because what will happen? What if you're wrong during your test and you die? Versus you can just trust the authority. He has the experience. You don't know where his experience came from, but he's an elder. He's older than you. So that is his authority in that situation. These are like the educated economists, essentially, that she's using. So the people that spent all that time studying the economy, it's their job, etc., their authority. So she leveraged an authority bias to create buy-in into her next position, which is he's going to take $4,000 from you. Like that's essentially the point that she landed. So after creating all of that emotional certainty against him, she then leveraged an authority bias to then get a person to justify to themselves the fact that he's taking money from you. And then she landed all of that on the branding that she put on him.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that.
Very very, very different opening. So even though he's responding to something that she did, he didn't in his mind think I need to create some warmth really quick before I dive into what I'm saying. He went at it directly. He said, first of all, I don't have a Trump sales tax. She knows that. So what he did was he indirectly called her a liar, right? And then he also addressed the branding that she put on him. So he was very, very aware of the branding that she was trying to place on him. So he wanted to address that first. And he went straight for it. Now that style of communication, that goes into what I was saying earlier. There wasn't a lot of finesse when it came to that. He used a lot of certainty in his tonality. It was tonality, certainty, and then going straight for just saying the thing basically and expecting to be believed. That type of communication is good for people who are already in a disposition to being open to what you're saying. Because of what she did, that's not really going to work on people who are set up in that little spell that she created, where they are kind of like seeing him as this enemy, etc., etc. They're not going to hear something like that, because that technique is like, it's dependent upon how much buy-in the hearer has with you. If you just say something and expect it to be believed and like, this is the truth and this is why, and you say it with a very certain and powerful and dominant tonality, if the person doesn't have a disposition of being open to hearing your words, they're not going to hear any of that.
Tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't.
All right. So what he's doing is he's keeping it along those same lines. Certainty, fact, fact, fact to him. The fact as he sees them. And then for his authority, what he did was he took her administration's actions as the authority. I placed these tariffs and they didn't take them off. So obviously I was right when I did that. Now, so what he's doing is he's trying to leverage the authority of his previous actions as opposed to authorities that are outside of him to justify his positions. So after he addressed that, he started going into his plan. And the way that he introduced his resonance was actually to speak into injustice, basically. People don't like being taken advantage of. Well, first of all, people hate taxes. You don't want to be spending your money and then have somebody take your money and just give it to somebody else because they stupid. Like, that's the idea that he's playing off of there. And it's something that's already inherent in a lot of people. So what that's doing is he's resonating the same thing she was doing, but a different way. He's speaking in terms of grievances that a person has, and he is going to be that righteous justifier that's going to come in and rectify that situation for you. So it's a different positioning for the resonance. It's not the I'm just like you resonance mirroring kind of thing. Is I understand you. It's that whole thing of speaking in terms of other people's interests. A Dale Carnegie technique, actually.
And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do.
So he went straight to authority at that point. But as opposed to what Kamala Harris did, utilizing the authority of academics and others, what he did was he utilized his own authority. He said, I did this during my administration. And on top of that, then you all didn't even take it off. So I'm right. So he not only did he leverage his own authority, he used them as kind of like the academic to justify that he was right kind of thing. Because if they didn't like what he did, then they would have stopped doing it. And that's the message that he's conveying to the listeners at that point.
They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class.
So that was essentially his pain acceleration. Now, the way that he was doing it was he was, again, speaking in terms of other people's interests. So he was leveraging the pain acceleration, but he was doing it in a way where people will resonate. So he's stating them as facts. He's doing the direct, strong communication style while stating things as facts. And he's saying it in a way and tapering in a way where a person is already experiencing that. Everybody knows what the grocery store is like and all the other sort of stuff. These are things that don't have to be explained. So again, he's leveraging mass psychology. It's a very, very powerful thing when you can understand the experience of who you're speaking to, and then you can frame your words in a way where they say, you're absolutely right. You understand what I'm going through. Like, by being able to do that in a non-try hard sort of way, they tend to just fall into believing what you're saying. It's very easy to go along with what's going on and what's being said to them at that point. Talking in terms of other people's interests. So by doing that, he doesn't have to set up things and use stories or anything like that. He can cut straight to it and get the same effect.
On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that Xi and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality, and we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the great.
So that was just more pain acceleration and talking in terms of what people are already complaining about.
I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
So there are two answers, very, very different, but very similar in the elements of what they do. A lot of persuasion is really the same elements, but there are infinite ways where a person can accomplish these things. Kamala Harris, utilizing narrative stories, branding, casual remarks, pain acceleration, transitional statements, framing the opponent against what she's saying, things like that, emotional certainty, logical certainty, authority biases, all of these things wrapped up into her answer. Trump, on the other hand, had a much more simplistic style. Like, to get his resonance, he just spoke in terms of what people are already saying, opposed to Kamala did, which was paint these narrative stories of her being exactly like the people that she speaks with. There was a lot more pause than I had to do with Kamala because she was stacking up technique after technique after technique, finesse after finesse after finesse. It was very skillful. She is a lawyer after all and a politician, and she has hundreds of millions of dollars to help people to get assistance with workshopping her answers. Trump, on the other hand, he utilized a very, very simplistic yet powerful approach. It was just focusing on a few key elements: authority of his past accomplishments, resonating with things that people are already saying, and then positioning himself as the righteous hero that will bring justice. And of course, if you like this breakdown, you're going to love what I found when I actually looked at the interview of the guy who did the second Trump assassination attempt. You can find a link to that video somewhere around here.